What if the moment you were told was the beginning of human history was actually somewhere in the middle of a much longer story that someone chose to cut short? Stay with me, because the missing pages are not missing by accident. They are sitting in caves and monasteries right now, and they describe an entire civilization already living on Earth before the name Adam ever appeared in the symbolic record. If a video like this is the reason your finger hovered over this thumbnail, do me a small favor before we move another inch. Tap the like button right now and watch how the next week of your feed starts to fill with material like this. Then subscribe and turn on the bell so the next one drops the moment it goes live. And if you know even one person who loses entire weekends to questions exactly like this, send this to them tonight. One share from you opens another reader to the manuscript rooms we are about to walk through. Here is the clean shape of what we are dealing with. A book once sat so close to Scripture that several major Christian traditions treated it as inspired. In the year 364, a regional council quietly removed it from the approved reading list. Centuries later, 11 surviving manuscript copies of that removed book were recovered from caves above the Dead Sea, more copies than most of the smaller books still bound inside your Bible today. Those manuscripts do not whisper. They describe in plain and patient prose a population of human beings who were already living on the earth, already organized, already producing food, already raising families, and already developed enough to be noticed by celestial visitors before the symbolic figure named Adam ever appeared on the stage. That is the simple claim. The scholarly work, the manuscript evidence, and the cultural memory behind that claim are what we are about to walk through tonight. Before we go any further, let me give you a sense of why this is not a sensational rabbit hole. The Book of Enoch is one of the most carefully studied documents outside the canonical Bible. It has generated entire academic careers. It has produced peer-reviewed commentaries and hardbound volumes with the kind of binding you would find in a university library basement. The scholars who work on it day after day are not chasing shock. They are chasing grammar, vocabulary, theology, and the kind of questions that have been sitting unanswered in print for over a century. The reason most viewers have never heard the full version of what the book actually says is not because the answer is secret. It is because the answer is uncomfortable, and because institutions, even ancient ones, are usually good at making uncomfortable questions very quiet. Let us start where the story starts, which is the year 364. A council convened in the city of Laodicea in what is now Western Turkey. The council did not speak for the whole Christian world. It was regional. But the churches that accepted its rulings carried its decisions for centuries afterward. One of those decisions singled out a specific text, the Book of Enoch. The council did not argue the book in detail. It did not produce a list of heresies. It did not trade rebuttals with anyone. It declared the book forbidden. Reading it became something the faithful were quietly steered away from. The instruction was not loud. It was effective. Over time, copying the book in the western provinces of Christianity slowed almost to a stop. The book did not disappear. It simply disappeared from the conversation in one half of the Christian world. The other half of the Christian world held on. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition preserved the full text in Ge'ez, the ancient literary language of Ethiopian Christianity, in churches and monasteries clustered around the old capital of Axum. The Ge'ez manuscripts held the chapters the Latin West no longer circulated, and they held them carefully for 15 centuries, while Western Christianity moved on without them. If you have ever wondered how a forbidden book stays readable for that long, and the answer is simple. Communities love their books. Priests love their books. Monks love their books. The book simply moved houses, and the houses held it well. Western readers did not get a complete English translation of Book of Enoch until 1906. That was the work of R.H. Charles at Oxford. His translation is the volume every modern comparative scholar has on the shelf. By the time Charles finished, 16 centuries had passed since the Laodicea ruling, and the book had been out of the Western conversation so long that many readers treated it as if it were a brand new archaeological discovery. In a few important ways, it was. Then came the moment that forced the conversation back open. Beginning in 1947 and continuing through the early years of the following decade, archaeologists, often working alongside Bedouin shepherds who had stumbled into the caves while hunting goats in the desert, pulled scroll after scroll from cliff faces and crevices in the Judean desert above the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. The location became known in shorthand as Qumran. Among the 11 caves that have produced significant material since then, Cave 4 has been the largest single source of fragments by a wide margin. Inside, Cave 4 lay 11 separate manuscripts of the Book of Enoch in Aramaic. 2 of them, catalogued as 4Q201 and 4Q202, preserve substantial portions of the section later titled The Book of the Watchers. The story of that find is worth lingering on for a moment. The Bedouin who first entered the caves in 1947 were not scholars. They were young men from the Ta'amire tribe, looking for a lost goat. They climbed into a fissure in the limestone cliff and found, in jars that looked older than anything they had ever seen, scrolls wrapped in linen that had been sitting in the dark for almost 2,000 years. Within months of the first find, the archaeological world arrived. By 1952, Cave 4 had been excavated in a series of careful campaigns. By the end of that decade, the fragments had been cleaned, photographed, and joined to earlier finds. Some pieces lay in the collection of the Dominican-run École Biblique in Jerusalem under the care of a small team of European priests. Other pieces went to the Rockefeller Museum in East Jerusalem. Eventually, the bulk of the collection moved into the controlled storage of what would become the Israel Antiquities Authority. What those researchers found in those fragments is, in plain language, deeply uncomfortable for anyone who has only ever heard the standard version of the creation story. The fragments are not hidden away. They sit in conservation rooms, photographed and indexed and available to qualified researchers on request. The same institutions now publish photographs of every line in catalog volumes. We are not dealing with a secret archive. We are dealing with an open archive that has been quietly sitting in plain sight for 70 years. Let me walk you through what the text actually says. The Book of the Watchers takes up chapters 1 through 36 of Book of Enoch. The chapters that matter most for our question sit between 6 and 9. The narrative opens in heaven, where a class of beings described in the text as the Watchers look down at the surface of the earth. The Watchers are understood by both ancient and modern readers as angels or divine messengers of some kind. That description is consistent across the manuscripts in Aramaic, in Ge'ez, and in the Greek fragments that survive. When the Watchers look down, they see something they did not expect to find. They see the daughters of men, and they see that these daughters are beautiful. The text records that they desired them. The key sentence, taken from the Ge'ez version, runs something like this. In those days, when the children of men had multiplied, there were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the Watchers, the sons of heaven, looked at them and found them desirable, and they took for themselves wives from among them. I want to slow down on that single sentence, because it carries more weight than most readers realize. The phrase in those days is a temporal anchor. It tells the reader that the descent happens inside a defined period that the Enoch author treats as separate from any kind of creation moment. There is no creation in this scene. There is multiplication, there is increase, there is a population that has been on the land long enough to expand, long enough to generate daughters whose beauty can be recognized and acted upon. The text does not say the daughters are new. It says they are multiplying. It says the population has been there long enough to do that. That single choice of vocabulary is doing enormous work in a short passage. Now, before we go any further into the scholarship, if you get value here, there is something fast and easy you can do that genuinely keeps this channel alive. Smash the subscribe button and tap the bell. Every single Thursday, a new video like this opens up another sealed room, and the bell means you never have to go looking for it. That one click keeps what we are doing moving forward. Now, the phrase, the daughters of men, has been read two fundamentally different ways in the history of interpretation. The dominant Western reading was forged by Jerome in the late 4th century. Jerome sat down to translate the Hebrew scriptures into the official Latin Bible, and he had to render the phrase Bene ha-Elohim, or sons of God. Jerome chose to translate that phrase as sons of Seth. Under his reading, the sons of God became the male descendants of Seth, the third son of Adam, traditionally understood as the righteous line. The daughters of men became the female descendants of Cain, the older brother, traditionally understood as the violent line. The entire story collapsed into a family feud inside one bloodline. There were no heavenly visitors. There was no pre-Adamite population. There was only a single human family behaving badly within itself. Augustine, one of the most influential thinkers, endorsed Jerome's reading. Augustine ruled that any interpretation implying human beings existed before Adam was inconsistent with Christian doctrine. That ruling carried theological authority for over 1,000 years. The habits of mind Augustine set in place still shape how students read Genesis. The Book of Enoch was on the shelf long before Jerome was born. The Book of Enoch never accepted Jerome's translation because the book had been written centuries earlier and preserves an older reading that does not need the sons of Seth gymnastics at all. In the Enoch tradition, the sons of heaven are exactly what the phrase suggests. They are not human. They are celestial. And the daughters of men are exactly what the phrase suggests they are. They are women from a human population already living on the ground. The older tradition never even encountered the family feud reading because the family feud reading had not been invented yet. The older tradition was simply keeping the plain sense of the words. You deserve to know the scholars who have stood on this question. George Nicholsburg produced the standard English language commentary on Fort Enoch. That commentary is the closest thing the field has to an authoritative treatment. Nicholsburg worked through the grammar and structure of chapters 6 through 9. He observed that the text repeats details about social organization, population growth, and cultural development in language assuming an established world. That is not how ancient authors describe recently created beings. That is how they describe a civilization that has been working for generations. Joseph Millick, based at the École Biblique in Jerusalem, identified the passage among the most linguistically careful sections of the Qumran Enoch corpus. Millick saw that the writer had chosen past continuous grammatical forms on purpose. That tense was the tense the author reached for to signal that the population described had not just appeared. Emil Puch published a careful study of the same Aramaic material in 1997. Puch showed that the grammatical pattern was not unique to Enoch. It matched the pattern used in Babylonian and Akkadian literary texts. Akkadian authors used the past continuous tense for established populations. They used a different grammatical shape when they wanted to describe origins. The Enoch passage uses the establishment grammar throughout. Lawrence Stuckenbrock of Munich extended Puch's observation in 2007. He noted that the past continuous tense in this passage is not a habit. It is a deliberate signal used to set up background conditions on the world as it already existed before the main narrative began. The Daughters of Men passage uses that grammar throughout. The signal tells the reader, we are arriving at a place that was already occupied. If you stack those 4 scholarly observations, they are not 4 opinions. They are 4 expert eyes arriving at the same reading from different points. The text is being careful, signaling that the women had a history behind them. The chapter is doing what a movie opening does with the city skyline. It says, here's a place that existed before the main character arrived. The next major piece of internal evidence sits deeper in the book. Chapters 85 through 90 make up the animal apocalypse. In this vision, Enoch has shown the entire sweep of human history. Human beings are represented as animals. Adam appears as a white bull, Eve appears as a white cow. Their descendants continue as white cattle. But the vision does not actually begin with Adam. Before the white bull walks onto the stage, other figures are already present. John Collins of Yale pointed out that the early verses carry figures that Western commentators have routinely skipped past in their writing. Collins wrote that the chronological structure is more complex than summarized. The pre-Adamite implications have been consistently understated. Margaret Barker took that observation further in her book Temple Theology. Barker traced the white bull symbolism back to rituals in the Jerusalem temple. The early temple preserved traditions encoding a memory of human existence before the Adamic creation account, as the West eventually understood it. Barker followed the symbol back into the temple liturgy, into actual practices of priests and worshippers who knew what the symbol pointed back to. If you put Collins and Barker together, you have 2 senior scholars saying the same thing. The opening scene has figures that predate Adam. The symbolic vocabulary connects to early temple practice, not late theology. That vocabulary carried meaning across generations inside a sanctuary. Halfway through this video, you know whether this is the kind of work you want to keep returning to. Before we move into the next stretch, drop me a comment with the single sentence that hit hardest. Not a thank you, but the sentence that is still ringing in your head. I read them all, and the ones that land deepest shape what I look into next. Then share this video with one friend who asks the kind of questions everyone around them politely avoids. That share opens the archives. Now I want to walk you through the economic detail in Chapter 7. Once the watchers have taken wives, the children are described as giants. The text says they consumed the resources of the existing human population. The grammar of this single line is doing critical work. The text does not say that humans learned to farm or began to produce. It says they were already producing. It says there was a surplus. It says the Nephilim ate the surplus. Surplus is not a new phenomenon. A society that produces surplus has moved past subsistence. It has organized agriculture, long-term storage, and trade relationships. Torleif Elgvin published a paper showing the agricultural vocabulary corresponds to descriptions of mature, settled civilizations. The text is not describing a new community scrambling to feed itself. The text is describing a long-running community producing a surplus. Imagine arriving at a city with markets and being told it was founded yesterday. The economics do not allow it. The Book of Enoch describes a city already there. The giants arrived at a city that was already there. Let me also tell you about an additional phrase in the Ge'ez text. The Ethiopian manuscript at Axum preserves an extra fragment in Chapter 7. Ephraim Isaac noted this phrase describes the humans as possessing knowledge. The Ge'ez word refers to skills transmitted across generations through teaching. It is the vocabulary of inheritance, not of solitary discovery. Accumulated knowledge across generations implies a long chain of lifetimes. The phrase implies a population that was already there for a long time. Now let me tell you what happened when this reading resurfaced in the West. It was not defeated in open argument. The West did not win a fair debate. The reading was placed to one side, and the record of that is traceable. Jerome made the pre-Adamite reading invisible by choosing the sons of Seth. The Vulgate was the standard Bible for Western Christianity for 1,000 years. Augustine backed the move, ruling other conclusions out of bounds. Together, they did not debate the reading. They made it harder to find. The second move belongs to R.H. Charles at Oxford in 1906. When Charles gave English readers a translation, the reading became available. But Charles hedged. He surrounded the implications with qualifications. The book became available without becoming legible. The third move belongs to Florentino Garcia Martinez in the early 1990s. He noted that the pre-Adamite question had not received attention in a century. He wrote that the question had been set aside, not answered. A question that has been set aside is still an open question. The fourth move is the one most readers have never heard about. In 2018, a research team from Birmingham applied to study the Qumran manuscripts. The team wanted to study the chapters containing pre-Adamite material. The application was denied. The materials were under ecclesiastical review. John Collins noted that 19th century travelers saw marginal annotations. Those annotations have not been photographed, catalogued, or described. Their content is known only to people working inside the archive. It is just the slow pace of review inside an ancient church. In 2022, a researcher in Oslo reported fragments with unpublished text. The fragments have been catalogued and stabilized, but not fully translated. They are sitting, as of the last public report, waiting. Hit the subscribe button and turn the bell on to keep this work coming. Share this video with one friend who asks why the story felt too clean. I want to be transparent about what I am and I'm not claiming. I'm not claiming Enoch proves a race anatomically distinct from humans. I'm not claiming population genetics has confirmed this popular phrasing. I am claiming the Enoch text describes a population already present. These events fall within what biblical chronology calls the Adamic timeline. The internal logic requires a population that predates the Genesis account. This requirement has been present in the manuscript evidence for millennia. Let us take the common objection seriously. Doesn't Genesis say Adam was first? The Book of Enoch does not say that. It describes Adam as a later figure. James Vanderkam noted, the Enoch tradition is the oldest surviving reading. It had no need to explain away a pre-Adamite population. The assumption of a singular first human was a later theological move. Now, let me land the part of this story that has haunted me the longest. In 2021, the Max Planck Institute published findings on ghost populations. The team identified genetic signatures that suggest interbreeding with archaic groups. The group's physical remains have never been found. There are no fossils. What their model described and what Enoch describes have a shared shape. Both describe an organized human group interacting with later arrivals. Enoch called it the daughters of men. Geneticists call it a ghost population. The two lines of evidence do not confirm each other. They rhyme. Two different disciplines arrived at the structural claim of organized groups. A population organized enough to be noticed, but leaving only genetic memory. Before the ending, leave a comment with the single sentence that landed hardest. Tap the subscribe button with the bell on. Every view matters. Manuscripts behind closed doors only come alive when you decide to look. The Aramaic fragments sit in the laboratories of the Israel Antiquities Authority. The Ge'ez manuscripts are inside the Ethiopian church in Axum. The oldest manuscripts describe the daughters of men as established and numerous. They were chosen out of a population that had been living there for generations. That description has not gone away. It has been translated and studied. And it has been, in equal measure, set aside by institutions. If you felt the official story was trimmed, this might be what you sensed. The chapter was not lost. It was forbidden, rediscovered, and hedged. It is still sitting in the archive, pointing at the question no one asks. The Book of Enoch does not ask you to believe in angels. It asks you to read. The grammar is past continuous. It is the grammar of an ongoing state. The population was on the land before the story we thought we knew opened. Send this video to someone you trust with uncomfortable questions. The manuscripts have been waiting a long time for a generation to read them. The grammar is still in the manuscript. The daughters of men are still described. The book is still on the shelf. And now, so are you.